Hi, and welcome to The Print. My name is Karanjeet Kaur. I'm a journalist and an editor. Let's talk today about two recent landmark cases and the death penalty debate in India. On 20th January, two Indian courtrooms separated by 2,500 kilometers delivered two widely diverging verdicts. Both the judgments feel wildly dissatisfying. The first is the life sentence awarded to Sanjoy Roy. You'll remember that Roy was convicted for the brutal rape and murder of a junior doctor at the R.G. Kar Medical College and Hospital in Kolkata. The second is the death penalty given to S.S. Grishma in the Sharon Raj murder case in Kerala. Let's talk a little bit about both these cases and why they're so important. Now, last August, India woke up to news that made us question everything we thought we knew about workplace safety. The details that emerged from the rape and murder of the young woman doctor in Kolkata, who was serving a 36-hour night shift without proper facilities, managed to shock even a nation where sexual violence is far too common. The accused, Sanjoy Roy, wasn't an outsider who had breached hospital security. He was a civic volunteer with unfettered access to the hospital. However, the vandalism, the nationwide protests, and the political and legislative wrangling that followed the case did not affect Roy's sentencing. Meanwhile, in the Neyatankara Additional Sessions Court in Kerala, 24-year-old Grishma was sentenced to death. She was convicted for poisoning her boyfriend, Sharon Raj, with an Ayurvedic concoction laced with herbicide in 2022. The court observed, and I quote, "The act of inviting Sharon over under the pretext of sexual intimacy and subsequently committing the crime cannot be ignored." The 586-page judgment is replete with several irrelevant references to Grishma's sexual behavior. Justice A.M. Bashir, who pronounced the judgment, said, and I quote again, that the case gave a message that a lover cannot be trusted. Nowadays, the youths are following live-in relationships. If it is viewed lightly, it is as good as use and throw, and one can easily target his partner. It will send a wrong message to society. Now, the aftermath of both these verdicts tells us a little bit about justice in India, but it tells us a lot more about ourselves. In West Bengal, protests have continued over Roy's mild sentence. In fact, even Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee expressed shock and demanded the death penalty. In Kerala, however, we witnessed a grotesque celebration of Grishma's death sentence. The All Kerala Men's Association, a men's rights group proudly opposed to lesbian feminism, attempted to pour milk over a cardboard cutout of Justice Bashir. They hailed the verdict as a victory against women's misuse of law. They even asked, with breathtaking obliviousness, "Why don't we men commit crimes? That is because we will have to spend the rest of our time in jail." These parallel narratives in both the cases force us to confront some uncomfortable questions. How do we measure justice? Why does one judge's restraint in the face of public bloodlust feel inadequate, while another's embrace of the ultimate penalty feels a little like dangerous political theatre? I want to be absolutely clear. Grishma's actions were calculated and cruel. She researched poison, made a failed prior attempt at murdering Raj, and eventually she administered him paraquat that prolonged his suffering. Sharon Raj's death deserves severe punishment. But the path to that punishment and the court's reasoning in reaching its conclusion reveals deeply troubling patterns in how our justice system operates. To understand why these verdicts feel so jarring, we must examine how India's courts actually approach capital punishment, beyond the simplified narratives that dominate public discourse. Despite its frequent invocation in media debates and political rhetoric, the death penalty was designed as an exception, not a rule. The rarest of rare doctrine is frequently bandied about and misused. I spoke to Anup Surendranath to understand this a little further. He is a professor of law and the executive director of Project 39E, which is a criminal justice program at the National Law University in Delhi. He said that the phrase itself seems to convey that it's simple, when in reality it is far more nuanced. This is what he said. One of the long-standing critiques of India's use of the death penalty is that there has never been any consistent meaning or application of which convicted persons should be sentenced to death and which should not be. The rarest of the rare phrase isn't merely about the brutality of a crime. The Supreme Court established clear steps. First, examining both the crime and the criminal, then weighing aggravating and mitigating factors, and finally, considering the accused's potential for rehabilitation. According to Project 39A's research over a 20-year period, Indian courts pronounce an average of 140 to 150 death sentences each year. However, and this is the interesting part, in 95% of those cases, death sentences don't survive appeal. They either get acquitted or commuted to life imprisonment. This is not a coincidence. It's evidence of the kind of trigger-happy instant justice that we expect. We live in a society that celebrates encounter killings and judges who give death sentences in 5 to 7 days, Surendranath told me. On the flip side, there's also the reality that judges in lower courts are operating under tremendous pressure. That results in what Surendranath labeled judicial indiscipline in the Grishma case. Where is the evaluation of mitigating factors? Where is the assessment of a potential for reformation? Instead, we get sermons about live-in relationships and dire warnings about youth morality. Now, the RG Kar verdict, on the other hand, while legally sound in its application of these principles, sheds light on a devastating reality. Violence against women is so endemic that even in its most brutal forms, it no longer registers as extraordinary. The issue isn't whether women should face consequences for their crimes. They absolutely must. The more troubling question to ask is this: why does our justice system reserve its strident moral condemnation for women who show the slightest bit of sexual agency? But violence against women, even the most horrific kind, is processed as an unfortunate but expected occurrence. When judges spend more time pondering a female perpetrator's sexual history than considering whether hospital corridors can ever be safe for women again, we must acknowledge that our metrics for measuring horror are fundamentally skewed. There is a need to other convicts in cases like these, Surendranath observed. He's pointing to a deeper societal helplessness that emerges after every high-profile attack on women. We've seen this pattern play out so often: the protests, the demand for the death penalty, and the promises of reform. Because it's easier to call for blood than to examine why, more than a decade after the Delhi gang rape, we are still fighting the same battles. Both the RG Kar and Sharon Raj verdicts reveal a need for neat narratives, for monsters we can identify and eliminate by sending our problems to the gallows. But violence rarely announces itself with such clarity. When we reduce justice to a spectacle, whether through public bloodlust or performative celebration, we dodge the harder questions about why women's bodies remain battlegrounds and why their choices invite harsher judgment than their violation.